this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I'm going to read you something from this lovely book. It's a vintage book. It's by Walter George Bell. It's called More About Unknown London. So I've got the first book, which is just Unknown London. I've marked my place here. So we're going to read this chapter. It's titled Ann Boleyn's Letter. Let's begin. I stood the other day in the little chamber in the lieutenant's lodgings of the Tower of London, wherein Queen Ann Boleyn slept her last night on earth. That is the tradition it has, and with a place of such long and varied associations as the Tower, often there is nothing more material than tradition upon which to depend. A doubt is cast over it when one recalls that first cry of horror uttered by the unhappy Queen, as she realised that she was shut into the grim fortress prison. Mr. Kingston, shall I go into a dungeon? The old constable of the Tower answered, No, madam, you shall go into your lodging that you lay in at your coronation, that we have from a hand near his time, and because of it, often it has been assumed that Anne Boleyn's last days were spent in the old royal palace within the Tower. Those buildings Oliver Cromwell has the credit a century after of having destroyed, foreseeing no future use for royal palaces for kings. Chapois, the ambassador, has left on record that the Queen needlessly enhanced her grief and misery by looking out of her window upon the scene of the execution of the 5 gentlemen condemned with her. In that case, the royal apartments certainly could not have been her doleful prison. They stretched out beyond the Wakefield Tower, any view of Tower Hill being impossible. It is for every reason unlikely that Henry VIII would have committed to confinement in his own royal chambers his dishonoured and discarded Queen, whom he seems to have pursued with inhuman enmity. Many things point to the use of the lieutenant's lodgings, the King's house of today. It was at that time the newest building in the Tower. There, Kingston and his wife could sleep outside the Queen's door, as he says they did. It fits in with Chapois' statement. The yeoman warder attending as I sought the Queen's chamber made part of the picture of the house, for he wore the uniform of King Henry VIII, for whom was built this old mansion, red tiled, and with its heavy oak timbers below the gables now exposed. G.R. was embroidered upon the tunic. That was the only change. He led the way up 2 flights of stairs, then along a passage lighted by the windows. Looking inwards upon the stone-paved space of Tower Green, which the ravens, striding away with long hops, make their undisturbed home, the key turned in the lock of the door opening into a square room. 14 feet it measures on every side, and there is a dark brown wainscoting of plain oak up to the low ceiling. The white ceiling can almost be touched by an upstretched hand. It is but 8 feet above the floor. This was the Queen's room. Outside the single casement window, the rampart walls extended, the battlements seems to have treated the unhappy Queen with the greatest consideration. His wife, Lady Kingston, and the Queen's aunt, Lady Boleyn, were her personal attendants. Little has transpired concerning those days spent within the Tower, save her protestations of innocence and the women's conversation, laboriously reported to Cromwell. But there is a letter by Kingston himself to that same Master Secretary, dated the day before the execution, which shows that harsh times and his hard task had not destroyed the humanity in him. At my coming, she said, Mr. Kingston, I hear say that I shall not die a forlorn, and I am very sorry therefore, for I vow to be dead by the time, and past my pain. I told her it should be now. Pain, it was so subtle, and then she said, I have heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck, and put her hand about it, saying heartily, I have seen many men and also women executed, and that they have been in great sorrow, and to my knowledge the lady has much joy and pleasure in her death. I glanced through the window, curious to see how far the view extended, over the battlement, and beyond the moat, looking west, the rise of Tower Hill, with all that gives it character today. All the distant tall warehouses were spread out below, though clear vision was obstructed by the leafless trees. The actual scaffold upon which the alleged participants with her in crime perished must, I think, have been mercifully sheltered from the Queen's anxious eyes, but the assembly of thousands of people in deep masses, the commotion, the little human ants, as they seem from this height and distance, going out to witness the death of their fellow ant, perhaps the noise rising to her quiet chamber, will have been sufficient indication that her despairing appeal to Henry to spare at least the lives of these had been as fruitless as had been the defence of her own good fame. In this little room, one must believe, in such privacy as was allowed to her in her bedchamber, Ann Boleyn wrote the famous and touching letter to King Henry VIII. If indeed that letter was ever written, it is reproduced at length in facsimile here, and it is well known. 4 years after Queen Anne Boleyn met her destined fate, Cromwell, whose statecraft had sent so many men to the block, the stake and the gibbet, himself passed to execution on Tower Hill, and on his papers being ransacked afterwards, this letter was found among them. That has been the traditional story. The document bears the endorsement in 3 lines, now mutilated. The Lady A to the King H of the Tower, which has been represented to be in Cromwell's handwriting. Out of that material a legend has been woven. story seems to fall to the ground. We are in the presence of an historical mystery which may be insolvable, and failing the production of an original holograph, can judge on the insecure basis of the contents alone. The letter is remarkable. It reads true. That is, I think, the impression that everyone must receive on a first reading. Its honesty seems so transparent. The phrases move along in such natural order. It expresses in words that are simple and unforced, yet one would expect in the circumstances to find expressed, so that reading one makes a mental picture of the anguished woman in her prison writing it. To question its authenticity seems almost dishonourable, inhuman. Such is the power of words, and the spell which the pitiful story of Ann Boleyn has weaved about her. Authentic or not, the letter has passages that have become part of our literature, and I give it here, not pandering to the silly vanity that of course everyone knows it. Sir, your Grace's displeasure and my imprisonment are things so strange unto me, as what to write or what to excuse I am altogether ignorant. Whereas you send unto me, willing me to confess a truth, and so to obtain your favour by such as one whom you know to be mine ancient professed enemy, I no sooner conceived this message by you than I rightly conceived your meaning, and if, as you say, confessing a truth, indeed, may procure my safety, I shall with all willingness and duty perform your command. But let not your Grace ever imagine that your poor wife will ever be brought to acknowledge a fault where not so much as a thought ever proceeded, and to speak a truth, never a prince had wife more loyal in all duty and in all true affection than you have ever found in Ann Boleyn, with which name and place I could willingly have contented myself. If God and your Grace's pleasure have been so pleased, neither did I at any time so far forget myself in my exaltation or received queenship, but that I always looked for such an alteration as now I find, for the ground of my preferment being on no surer foundation than your Grace's fancy. The least alteration was fit and sufficient, I knew, to draw that fancy to some other subject. You have chosen me from a low estate to be your queen and companion, far beyond my desert or desire. If then you found me worthy of such honour, God your Grace, let not any light fancy or bad counsel of mine enemies withdraw your princely favour from me, neither let that stain, that unworthy stain of a disloyal heart towards your good Grace, ever cast so foul a blot on your most dutiful wife, and the infant princess, your daughter. Try me, good King, but let me have a lawful trial, and let not my sworn enemies sit as my accusers and my judges. Yea, let me receive an open trial, for my truth shall fear no open shame. Then shall you see either mine innocency cleared, your suspicion and conscience satisfied, the ignominy and slander of the world stopped, or my guilt openly declared, so that whatsoever God or you may determine of me, your Grace may be freed from an open censure, and mine offence being so lawfully proved, your Grace is at liberty, both before God and man, not only to execute worthy punishment on me as an unlawful wife, but to follow your affection already settled slander must bring you the joying of your desired happiness, then I desire of God that he will pardon your great sin therein, and likewise mine enemies, the instruments thereof, and that he will not call you to a strict account for your unprincely and cruel usage of me, at his general judgment seat, where both you and myself must shortly appear, and in whose just judgment I doubt not, whatsoever the world may think of me, mine innocence shall be openly known and sufficiently cleared. My last and only request shall be that myself may only bear the burden of your Grace's displeasure, and that it may not touch the innocent souls of those poor gentlemen who, as I understand, are likewise in strait imprisonment for my sake. If ever I have found favour in your sight, if ever the name of Ann Boleyn hath been pleasing you in your ears, then let me obtain this request, and so I will leave to trouble your Grace any further with mine earnest prayers to the Trinity, to have your Grace in his good keeping, and to direct you in all your actions. From my doleful prison in the Tower, the 6th of May, your most loyal and ever faithful wife, Ann Boleyn. Now read this a second and a third time, till the spell has gone, and there comes a cankering doubt, and that doubt grows. The date is important. It is 4 days after her arrival in the Tower. If this is the Queen's letter to Henry VIII, then it contains most things calculated to defeat its purpose, which was an appeal to have justice openly done to her. The reference to Jane. Seymour, who to her knowledge here disclosed had already supplanted Anne Boleyn in the King's affections, could only rouse his furious resentment and make his merciless determination immovable. If the letter is genuine, transferring the charge of unfaithfulness from herself to him, then the shaft was driven into the wound in which a man so jealous as Henry was most sensitive, and there wrangling. It does much to explain the extraordinary vindictiveness of Henry towards his discarded queen. The feasts and masques and entertainments in which he indulged while the death judgment against the imprisoned woman was still pending, his dressing all in white on the day of the execution, and the immediate marriage thereafter with Jane Seymour. High objects of state, despite Freud's tireless efforts to not satisfactorily